June 24th, 1314. The Bannockburn isn't flowing with water. It is paved solid with the English aristocracy. The stream is so choked with the bodies of armored knights and drowned horses that a man can walk from one bank to the other dry-shod. You aren't stepping on mud, you're stepping on the faces of earls, barons, and the finest heavy cavalry in Europe. This isn't a battle. It is a traffic jam of death, a catastrophic failure of logistics where 3,000 men have been herded into a kill box and slaughtered. By a force, a fraction of their size, history tells us the Scots won the Battle of Bannockburn through bravery. That is a lie. They won because they turned the landscape itself into a weapon of mass destruction. To understand how we arrived at this river of corpses, you have to strip away the romantic myths. When we think of medieval battles, Hollywood has trained us to imagine chaotic, honorable duels, where the good guys win because they have more heart. But war in the 14th century was not about heart. It was about math, physics, and terror. And by all calculated metrics, what happened here should have been impossible. The English army that marched north that summer was not just a military force, it was a moving city. It was the Death Star of the Middle Ages, led by King Edward II. This force consisted of over 2,000 heavy cavalry, the medieval equivalent of modern tanks, and some 16,000 to 20,000 infantry and archers. These were professional killers encased in plate and mail, riding destriers bred specifically to trample human beings into paste. The supply train alone was said to be 20 miles long, laden with gold, wine, and portable wardrobes, because King Edward was so certain of victory that he packed for a celebration, not a fight. Opposing this juggernaut was Robert the Bruce, self-proclaimed King of Scots. His force was laughable in comparison. He had perhaps 6,000 men, mostly spearmen, with a handful of light cavalry. They had no heavy armor, no endless supply wagons, and they were exhausted from years of guerrilla warfare. If you were a betting man in 1314, putting money on, the Scots wasn't a gamble. It was charity. The English outnumbered them 3-1, potentially 4-1. But numbers on a page do not account for the terrain. And they certainly do not account for desperation. Robert the Bruce knew he could not defeat the English in an open field. To do so would be suicide. So he didn't. He decided to change the map. The strategic prize at the center of this collision was Stirling Castle. It is impossible to overstate the importance of this fortress. It was the key to the kingdom. Whoever held Stirling held the gateway between the lowlands and the highlands. It was the throat of Scotland, and Edward II was coming to squeeze it shut. But there was a catch. A bizarre bureaucratic technicality that actually triggered this entire bloodbath. A year prior, Robert the Bruce's brother, Edward Bruce, had made a gentleman's agreement with the English commander of the castle. The deal was simple. If the English army didn't arrive to relieve the castle by Midsummer's Day, 1314, the castle would surrender to the Scots without a fight. It was meant to be a clever diplomatic squeeze, but it backfired spectacularly. It gave the King of England a deadline, gave him a specific date and a specific location where he had to show up. For a guerrilla fighter like Robert the Bruce, this was a nightmare. His entire strategy relied on hitting, running, and vanishing into the mist. He survived by being a ghost. Now his brother's foolish deal forced him to become a wall. He had to stand and fight a pitched battle against the mightiest army in Christendom on a day chosen by the enemy. When Bruce heard about the deal, he was reportedly furious. Likely wanting to strangle his brother, he knew that facing the English heavy cavalry on open ground was a death sentence. The English knights were an unstoppable kinetic force. Charge of 2,000 heavy horses generated enough force to shatter any infantry formation instantly. The ground would shake, the noise would be deafening, and the psychological impact alone caused most armies to break and run before contact was even made. So Bruce had to make a choice. He could retreat, letting Stirling Castle remain in English hands and losing his credibility as king, or he could stand and risk the total annihilation of Scotland's fighting power. He chose to stand, but he wasn't going to play by English rules. If the English were bringing a hammer, Bruce wasn't going to be the nail. He was going to be the anvil. He arrived at the battlefield weeks early. He walked the ground of the new park, a hunting reserve south of the castle. He looked at the marshy streams of the Bannockburn. He looked at the dense trees, and he began to visualize a kill box. This is where the story shifts from a tale of bravery to a masterclass in combat engineering. Bruce realized that the English army's greatest strength, its massive size and heavy cavalry, was also its greatest weakness. They were slow. They needed vast amounts of space to maneuver, and they were arrogant. They expected the Scots to run. Bruce decided to use that arrogance against them. He began to prepare the ground, transforming the landscape itself into a weapon. Now, this wasn't just about digging a few ditches. It was an industrial-scale excavation project designed to funnel the English into a meat grinder. As the sun rose on the days leading up to the battle, the Scots weren't just sharpening spears, they were digging. We often picture medieval soldiers solely as warriors. But here, they were laborers. They dug hundreds of small knee-deep pits known as pots. These weren't large moats. They were precise, honeycombed traps, each about a foot wide and hidden with sticks and grass. Inside each pit, they placed a sharp wooden stake pointing upward. The design was cruel and specific. It wasn't meant to kill a man. It was meant to snap the leg of a horse. Bruce knew that a charging knight on a horse is a tank, but a knight, on the ground, trapped under a screaming, thrashing animal, is just a man in a metal can waiting to be opened. The atmosphere in the Scottish camp must have been suffocating. Every man there knew what was coming north. They could probably feel the vibrations of the English march long before they saw the banners. The English army was a spectacle of wealth and power. Their armor shone so brightly in the sun that contemporary chroniclers said it looked like the land itself was on fire with light. They brought with them not just weapons, but the full psychological weight of the English crown. They were coming to crush a rebellion, to hang traitors, and to restore order. They did not expect a fight. They expected a rout. But as the English vanguard approached the Bannockburn on June 23rd, they found the Scots waiting, not hiding in the woods, not running for the hills, but standing in formation. It must have looked pathetic to the English commanders, a few thousand spearmen in rough tunics standing against the glimmering tide of chivalry. But this visual disparity was part of the trap. Bruce wanted them to attack. He needed them to commit. He was dangling the bait, knowing that the English knights, driven by their code of chivalry and their lust for glory, wouldn't be able to resist charging. And he was right. The stage was set for one of the most shocking upsets in military history. But before the armies would clash en masse, a single moment of individual violence would set the tone for everything that followed. A moment that felt more like a scripted movie scene than reality, where a king would gamble his life and his nation on a single swing of an axe. It is the afternoon of June 23rd. The main English army is still struggling through the narrow roads to the south, but the vanguard has arrived. These are the eager young knights, the glory hunters, led by the Earls of Gloucester and Hereford. They ride out into the new park, expecting to flush out a few terrified peasant skirmishers. Instead, they find the Scottish army waiting and disciplined. Circles. And right there, riding out in front of his lines, is the king himself. Robert the Bruce is not hiding. He's wearing a gold circlet around his helmet, a gleaming target that says, "I am the king." But there's a problem. Bruce isn't on a massive warhorse. He's riding a small, nimble palfrey, essentially a pony meant for travel, not combat. To an English knight, this looks like a joke. It looks like a gift from God. Enter Sir Henry de Bohun. He is the nephew of the Earl of Hereford, young, heavily armored, and riding a destrier that weighs as much as a small car. He spots the gold crown. He sees the small horse. In his mind, the war is already over. He believes he's about to end the Scottish rebellion with a single lance thrust and become the greatest hero in English history. He lowers his lance, spurs his monster of a horse, and charges. This is the moment where history holds its breath. By all military logic, Robert the Bruce should retreat behind his wall of spears. A man on a pony does not joust with a heavy cavalryman. It is physics. If de Bohun's lance connects, the kinetic energy will punch through Bruce's armor and lift him out of the saddle like a rag doll. His generals are screaming internally for him to run, but Bruce doesn't move. He sits motionless on his small horse, watching the English knight thunder toward him. The ground shakes. The distance closes. 80 yards, 40 yards, 10. At the very last second, just as the steel tip of the lance is about to pierce his chest, Bruce pulls his reins. He doesn't panic. He pivots. His small, agile horse sidesteps the charging destrier with the grace of a matador dodging a bull. De Bohan misses. His momentum carries him past the king, exposing his flank and the back of his head. In that split second, Bruce stands up in his stirrups. He's wielding a battle axe. He doesn't swing it wildly, brings it down with the precision of a woodcutter splitting a log. The axe strikes de Bohan's helmet. The force is so immense that it doesn't just dent the steel. It cleaves through the helmet and splits the knight's skull from crown to chin. The handle of the axe shatters from the impact. Henry de Bohan is dead before he hits the ground. The silence that follows must have been deafening, broken only by the thud of the body and the cheers erupting from the Scottish lines. This wasn't just a duel. It was a psychological nuclear bomb. The English vanguard freezes. Just watch their champion, fully armored and mounted on a tank, get deleted by a man on a pony with a hand axe. The invincibility of the English knight is shattered in an instant. Bruce returns to his lines, calm and composed. His commanders rush to him, furious that he risked the entire future of Scotland on a moment of bravado. They scold him for his recklessness. And Bruce's response? He looks at the splintered wood in his hand, shrugs, and simply says, "I have broken my good axe." This nonchalance is the final nail in the coffin of English morale for the day. The English vanguard, rattled in leaderless retreats in confusion. But they don't leave. They pull back to the wet, marshy ground known as the Cars to Camp 4. The night they are angry, they are humiliated, and they are thirsty. They begin to drink. Meanwhile, in the Scottish camp, the mood is grimly focused. Bruce knows the real test is tomorrow. He has won the opening move, but the full weight of Edward's army, 20,000 angry men, is about to fall on him. That day, that night, a traitor crosses the lines with information that changes everything. As night falls on June 23rd, the two armies are separated by less than a mile, but they exist in two different worlds. The Scots are camped in the dry, sheltered woods of the new park. They're eating oatmeal, praying and resting. They're ready. The English, however, are in hell. Having been checked by the Scots' traps and terrain during the day, they have moved down onto the Carse of Balquidderach. It sounds like a fantasy location, but in reality, it is a tidal flat, a marshy, mosquito-infested bog bounded by the Bannockburn and the River Forth. Imagine 20,000 men and thousands of horses, trying to sleep in a swamp. The ground is so soft that the horses sink to their fetlocks. The men cannot lie down without soaking in cold mud. There is no space to pitch tents. They're packed shoulder, tired, wet, and terrified. The morale shock of seeing their champion killed by a peasant king is festering. Discipline begins to break down. The English supply wagons issue wine instead of water, and a drunken, nervous hum rises from the dark swamp. They are not an army resting for battle. They're a mob trapped in a bog in the middle of this chaotic night. A shadow slips away from the English camp and heads toward the Scottish lines. This is Sir Alexander Seton, a Scottish knight, who has been fighting for the English. But the sight of the day's events has changed his mind. He is brought before Robert the Bruce, and he delivers a piece of intelligence that changes history. He tells Bruce, "Sir, if you wish to take Scotland, the time is now." The English have lost heart. Seton confirms what Bruce suspects. The English are disorganized and cramped. Their massive numbers are actually choking them. They are packed so tightly in the narrow neck of land between the rivers that they cannot deploy their formations. Bruce realizes the English have made a fatal error in logistics. They have parked a Ferrari in a closet. They have power, but no room to use it. Bruce makes a decision that defies all medieval military convention. Usually the smaller army stays on the defensive, but Bruce decides that at first light, he will not wait to be attacked. He will attack. He orders his men to prepare for a dawn assault using a formation that will become legendary. To understand why the next day becomes a slaughter, you have to understand the mechanics of the Schiltron. This wasn't just a crowd of men holding sharp sticks. It was a highly disciplined, mobile fortress. Imagine a giant, bristling hedgehog made of 500 men. They stand in a circular or oval formation, ranks deep. The outer ranks kneel, planting the butts of their 12-foot pikes into the ground, angling the steel tips outward at the height of a horse's chest. The ranks behind them stand, holding their pikes level at the height of a rider's face. Crucially, Bruce had trained these men to move. Unlike the static phalanxes of antiquity, Bruce's Schiltrons could advance while keeping formation. They were offensive steamrollers. The physics of the Schiltron are simple and brutal. Denies the enemy cavalry any surface area to contact. A horse, no matter how well trained, will not charge into a solid wall of steel points. It will shy away, swerve. By advancing these forests of spears into the cramped English position, Bruce intends to compress the English army until they literally cannot lift their arms to fight. He is going to use the English army's own mass to crush it to death. Dawn breaks on June 24, 1314. The sun rises over a battlefield that defies all logic. The English army, stiff, cold, and hung over from a sleepless night in the marsh, looks up to see an impossible sight. The Scots are not retreating. They are not holding their ground in the woods. They're marching out. Of Schiltrons emerge from the tree line, advancing into the open plain, like slow-moving mountains of steel. King Edward II watches this from his saddle, bewildered. He turns to his veteran commander, Ingram d'Umfreville, and asks a question that reveals just how disconnected he is from reality. Will yonder men fight? At that moment, the entire Scottish army halts. Thousands of men drop to their knees. To Edward, this looks like surrender. He laughs, exclaiming, "They kneel. They ask for mercy." Umfreville, who knows the Scots better, looks at the kneeling men with dread. He replies, "They ask for mercy, sire, but not from you. They ask it of God, for these men will conquer or die." As the Scots rise, the psychological trap snaps shut. The English vanguard, led by the Earl of Gloucester, makes a fatal error driven by ego. The Earl had been accused of cowardice by the king the night before. He's desperate to prove his loyalty. He doesn't wait for his archers. Doesn't wait for infantry support. He orders an immediate heavy cavalry charge. This is the collision of two eras. 500 knights against a moving wall of pikes. The physics are horrific. As the English horses thunder uphill toward the Scottish lines, they expect the peasants to scatter. They don't. The Schiltrons lock into place. The front ranks kneel. The rear ranks brace. The impact sound is described by chroniclers as a massive crash, like a falling building. But it isn't the sound of breaking Scottish lines. It is the sound of English cavalry shattering against an immovable object. The Earl of Gloucester is thrown from his horse and hacked to pieces instantly. Scores of knights are impaled on the 12-foot spears. Their horses, maddened by pain, rear and thrash, crushing their own riders and breaking the momentum of the charge behind them. The forest of spears holds, and then it does something terrifying. It starts to walk forward. Imagine the horror for the English infantry behind the cavalry. They are stuck in a bottleneck bordered by the Bannockburn on one side and the Pelstream burn on the other. They can't move left. They can't move right. And now, a wall of sharp steel is pushing their own cavalry backward into them. This is the beginning of the crush. The English army is so large that it becomes its own prison. The men in the back are pushing forward, eager to fight, unaware of the slaughter at the front. The men at the front are trying to retreat, to escape the spears. The pressure builds. Ribs begin to crack. Men are lifted off their feet by the sheer density of the crowd. Aren't dying from sword strokes yet. They're dying from compression asphyxia. The Scots have successfully engineered a human trash compactor. And the English army is the garbage. At this point in the battle, any student of history should be asking a screaming question. Where are the archers? The English longbow is the most devastating weapon of the age. 14 years earlier at the Battle of Falkirk, the English destroyed William. Wallace's Sheltrans simply by standing back and raining arrows until the Scottish formations disintegrated. A schiltron is a fortress against cavalry, but against arrows, it is just a large stationary target. The English commanders know this. They aren't stupid, they are just cramped. Desperate to break the deadlock, the English commanders finally manage to maneuver a large body of Welsh archers out to the flank. They scramble up a steep slope on the Scottish left. This is the moment of maximum danger for Bruce. If these men are allowed to draw their bows, the Scottish lines will collapse within minutes. The archers plant their feet, knock their arrows, and prepare to turn the Scottish victory into a massacre. But Robert the Bruce has a memory like a steel trap. Was there at Falkirk. He saw Wallace's men die because they had no cavalry to protect them. He has spent 14 years preparing for this exact second. Just as the first volley is about to fly, a thunder of hooves erupts from the Scottish rear. It is Sir Robert Keith, the Marshal of Scotland. He leads a small elite force of 500 light cavalry. They have been waiting in reserve, hidden, with only one job: kill the archers. The timing is surgical. Archers are deadly at a distance, but they are helpless in close quarters. They wear no armor. They carry only small knives. And because they were rushed into position, they haven't had time to plant their defensive stakes. Keith's cavalry hits them from the side like a hammer striking glass. It isn't a battle. It is an execution. The archers are cut down before they can loose a single effective volley. The survivors panic. And here is where the disaster multiplies. They don't run away from the battle. They run back into it. It's terrified. Screaming archers flee headlong into the packed ranks of their own infantry. The chaos is absolute. The English army is now fighting itself. The infantry, already squeezed by the advancing Scottish spears, are now being trampled by their own retreating archers. Communication breaks down entirely. The rear of the English army still thinks they are winning and pushes forward. The front is being crushed. The middle is a swirling mosh pit of confusion. With the threat of the longbow removed, the Scottish schiltrans are now invincible. They have no natural predators left on the field. Bruce sees the confusion and orders his entire line to advance. The hedgehog is no longer just defending. It is hunting. The Scots push forward in a rhythm of stabbing steel, shouting on them, they fail. The English knights, the proudest warriors in Europe, are trapped in a nightmare. They are pinned so tightly against one another that they cannot lift their weapons to strike. Men are fainting from the heat and pressure, only to be trampled into the mud. The ground is turning into a slurry of blood and marsh. The Battle of Bannockburn has ceased to be a contest of skill. It has become a contest of volume. The English army is running out of room to exist. By mid-morning, the battle has ceased to be a fight. It has become a crushing machine. The Scottish schiltrans are no longer just holding the line. They're advancing step by bloody step, compressing the massive English army into a space that is physically too small to contain it. The English are backed up against the steep banks of the Bannockburn. They're trapped between a wall of Scottish spears and a deep, muddy stream. This is where the true horror of medieval combat reveals itself. It isn't the sword that kills the most men here. It is the pressure. As the Scots push forward, the English rear ranks instinctively push back to avoid the water. The result is a terrifying phenomenon known as crush asphyxia. Thousands of men are pressed together so tightly that their lungs cannot expand to take a breath. Knights in heavy plate armor are lifted off their feet by the sheer density of the crowd, suspended upright, helpless, dying of suffocation, while still standing, those who fall do not get back up. They are trampled into the mud by their own comrades. The ground is turning into a slippery, crimson slush of blood, dirt, and marsh water. The noise is indescribable. The clashing of steel, the screams of horses, and the desperate cries of men being crushed to death creates a wall of sound that drowns out commands. The Bannockburn itself, the stream that borders the battlefield, begins to fulfill the gruesome destiny we saw at the beginning of this story. As the English line begins to buckle under the relentless Scottish pressure, men and horses are forced backward into the ravine. The banks are steep and slippery. Heavily armored knights slide down into the water, landing on top of one another. They drown in inches of water, weighed down by steel, pinned by the bodies of their friends. The stream becomes a dam of corpses. For the Scottish soldiers, this is a moment of savage vindication. For years, they have been hunted, starved, and butchered by these same English lords. Now, the roles are reversed. They shout on them, as they drive their pikes into the chaotic mass. They are not fighting individual duels, working like a thresher, harvesting the English army row by row. King Edward II, watching from the rear, is witnessing the impossible, his invincible. War machine is eating itself. His commanders are dead. His archers are scattered. His infantry is suffocating. The greatest army in Christendom is dissolving into a panic-stricken mob. But the final blow, the stroke that will turn this defeat into a legendary rout, has not even landed yet. It is waiting just over the hill in the form of an army that doesn't actually exist. The English army is broken, compressed, and dying, but they are not yet running. The sheer mass of men means that even as they die, they are stuck in place. Battle hangs by a thread. The Scots are exhausted. They have been fighting for hours against a force 3 times their size. If the English rearguard decides to push one last time, the weight of numbers could still turn the tide.